X to the Z exhibit.
What's up, guys? It's Andy Frisella.
This is your boy, Foul Monch.
This is Ryan Serhant.
This is Shingy.
Hi, it's Patrick Codneys.
This is Sonia Sarvatani.
This is Director X.
Hey, everybody, I'm Forbes Riley.
Yo, this is Goldie.
This is Amberly Lago.
This is Chris Voss.
Michael Francis here.
Yo, this is Charlie Tuna.
Hey, what's up? It's Billy G.
And you're listening to The Run GpG
podcast.
Well, I'm going to go hang out and listen to David's next podcast from The Run GpG.
You might hear something you like. Peace.
My guest today is Patrick Codneys, the founding member of Front 242, one of the most influential electronic and industrial groups in music history. Originally from Belgium, Patrick and Front 242 came to prominence during the 80s and 90s as pioneers of the style called EBM. And as mentioned, they were and are still a profound influence on the electronic, experimental, and industrial music genres since their inception. The group has recently released a live album, if I'm not mistaken, and is on tour again. I'm looking forward to discussing the history of the group, what they're up to now, as well as the history and the current state of electronic and industrial music with my guest, Patrick Codneys. Welcome to the Run GpG podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I thought you would send like a jingle or something like that.
No.
Okay.
Done in post-production. Well, welcome here, Patrick. Yeah, as I was mentioning to you, I was really looking forward to sitting down with you from a personal perspective. I grew up with Front 242 music, I was telling you, and the industrial music of the 90s. I was a DJ for many years. And Front 242 is actually still on my playlist, but also the group has been active again. You're about to go on tour. But there's also been, as I was telling you before we started recording here, there's been a resurgence of these influential groups from the 90s. They're making a little bit of a comeback. The tours have been very popular. Front 242 is one of them. What do you think is happening, and what's inspired the latest tour for you guys, and the most recent live album as well?
Well, the big difference is it comes from probably the music market. I think that studio work is not valuable anymore for a lot of bands. And the technology allows you to really change even the tracks that you had from the past. So for us, the main platform to create became live shows, became the stage. The stage got like lights, a scenography, it's got like a physical feeling of the music. And so what we've been doing the last years is transforming most of our tracks, including new tracks also, live, because that, like I said, that became really the creative platform for us rather than studio work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it's awesome to see because, so much of the music we see right now, especially electronic music, it was influenced by so much of what was created back then, right? Which I'm sure you agree. We just recently had Goldie on the show and, UK drum and bass jungle legend. Yeah. And what's interesting about Goldie, we were talking about it. We said like, the drum and bass that's produced now it sounds the same, just the technology is a little different, right? But the music sounds the same. And when Front started, we were at the beginning of it all, sampling, using machines in that way, creating that dark electronic, bass sound. So do you mind taking us back into a little bit of the history? Like what was, how did Front 242 form and what was the genesis of the group?
Well, you have to know that in Belgium, we don't have a musician market, not like England or North America. So you cannot basically gather with friends and start a band. So most of us were working on our own. So no access to musicians means you replace your drummer by a rhythm box, or you will replace your bass player by also a bass line machine. So we all were pretty much independent, like very almost like working isolated. What put us together is actually the music shop where Daniel was working, and we were buying our instruments there. And so we started to connect, and I was working with the singer, Jean-Luc. And so he was looking for a singer and somebody to collaborate. So we gathered together and at the studio with Daniel, and we released the second single actually, because he had an instrumental singer, but the second single, Human, was released under this association of people, and later Richard came as a performer. So it's pretty much individuals that came a little bit from different boards, but that were also entities on their own that decided to go together, also to put the instruments, the music instruments together, because at the time it was still quite expensive, not everything, but some. And we were very lucky because we were very complementary. Everybody had a different section to work with. And at the time, don't forget that it was very difficult to work with analog synth because there was no memory button. So what you were doing was lost the next hour. You had to switch to another song. So all those people brought together their knowledge and trying to bring something together to create. We had to create an aesthetic because electronic music is much more mental than rock music or blues. And we needed to create a new genre that would match this type of music, because the recipes from rock music, for instance, didn't apply for electronic music because the machines were so complicated and difficult to work on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Breaking down the history, and it's we almost look at it it's nostalgic, right? It's like that Renaissance period of electronic music. But what was behind the name Front 242? I've heard you answer this before, but what was behind the name Front 242?
Well, it's a purely graphic name. It's like a name that we like you choose a brand, because front can be set in almost all languages, and 242, the numbers, the same thing. And it was very important, that logo, because we really were standing behind that sort of, it was almost like a incorporated logo, something like that. There was never a strong ego. People were working for the project Front 242. It was not like what you might see in a lot of bands where you have a leader or a guy who needs to do his guitar solo. The way of making music was so complicated at the time, so difficult, that we had all to work together for that one Front 242 sign.
That's cool. That's really interesting. Now, there was something that made the group so interesting and popular, back then. The group started during the backdrop of the Cold War in Eastern Europe. It was a heightened political time, and you were defined by a style called rivet head. Do you remember that phrase, rivet head? It was that fashion, the style. And I think the fans, at the time, they were products of that post-punk era, really. Would you agree with that? And I guess the next question is, if you could be at war with an ideology today, what would that be?
Well, I think that what was always very interesting for us is that we had to fight in a way against the general music business, because we were not Anglo-Saxon. We didn't have a chance to have big labels, and so there was a sort of feeling of resistance, and this translates in the music, something of an emergency or something of a danger. Also, we didn't consider music as being an entertaining, something that was related to a certain reality. And at the time, it was the Cold War. If you listen to Front 242 today, there's a track called Red Team that could totally apply for any news of what is happening for the moment in Europe. So I think the field where we were working on was closer to a sort of film soundtrack than really trying to be in a genre that would be jazz or blues or whatever. Don't forget also that we are not musicians. There's not one musician in this band. There's just people touching knobs, and we have good ears though, but so it's a work more like a collage, and that means that you create a sort of puzzle with political quotes, like samples from movies, that create something subconscious in the person listening to it. He's aware of the danger. You don't understand totally the lyrics, so it's more like an emotional way of bringing out the music rather than trying to have a message, for instance.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a quote of yours. I don't know if you remember saying this. When you were asked to define your sound, you said, "We're somewhere in between Throbbing Gristle, Kraftwerk, and bands like that, but we are exclusive and have nothing to do with any fashion." So looking back now, do you still agree with that? And maybe what were your biggest influences at the time?
Okay, well, I would agree with that. Partly, it's true that in my case, Throbbing Gristle was an influence, as well as Kraftwerk. Of course, we cannot go around those guys. But But the thing is that I believe we created our own genre because of some specification in our music, like the drums were always prominent, very ahead, and this, for instance, helped us to go more into the dance music or be recognized by the dance society. But there was also a lot of research in sound, which was very important for us at the time, which keeps F242 being specific. To tell you the truth, I think if we're still on the market, it's because I still don't hear a lot of bands doing this type of music with this type of collage. And it remains our recipe with it's our brand. It's something that is totally, you see it on stage. There's a strong parallel between the imagery of the covers with the music, what is happening on stage. It's really a full concept. And the idea of a concept is not very often used anymore those days. But I think we have that sort of recipe that is proper to our music.
Yeah, 100%. And you referenced it, you mentioned it, but you became known for your live performances in particular, infamous, if you will, right? Involved loud sound, aggressive stage presence, smoke, bright flashing lights, of course. And there was something so different about industrial shows then. Why were the live performances of, this genre, industrial, and F242 so compelling and memorable?
From the beginning, we always had that feeling that we needed to provoke. For the reason that I said before, we were not recognized by not only the music business, but neither by journalists. People who were doing reviews were, at the time in the early 80s, they didn't have a clue of what electronic music was. There was a little bit of clumsiness also in the way we were doing music, but the people couldn't grasp what we were doing. And we had a lot of very, if not no reviews or bad reviews. And a way for us to bring the media to us, but also to be more popular, was to be very extreme. So we started to have those like paramilitary uniform. We didn't have smoke machines, so we had like real smoke stuff on stage from the army that we were going. So the more and more punk or post-punk people were coming because it was very provocative, very extreme, something they never saw before. And I think from that beginning of that time, the audience was always the key for us. And it's because the audience was following us so strongly that after the press came to us, just like another way around, but people could identify to that. I think people go to concert also to express themselves. It's something I always like by the punk movement, is that the audience was as violent as the bands, and the audience is also an actor, that it's part of the show is so important. And we always left that open. We still have, after all that time, we still have like pogos and pits dancing and stuff like that. It's something that is very expressive. And I think the band is very expressive.
Yeah, it's interesting because like critics, if you go through like the old press from back then, critics of industrial music, and you called, the music cold, dark, devoid of feeling. But it really became an incredible movement, a popular movement in that post-punk era. And like you said, there was something that was added in the emotion of the shows that made it so popular. But you ended up touring with Ministry at the time. It was kind of an infamous tour. Can you tell us how that came to be, and what your most memorable maybe live moments might have been over the past, few decades?
Well, the tour with Ministry was thanks to Wax Trax, which is like a legendary label. These guys were like really brought us to the States, and they were, for us, they were visionary. That matter. Ministry was on Wax Trax at the time, but Ministry was a sort of pop band at the time. It was very, very different than what you hear now. I remember all Jourgensen watching our shows every time and being like impressed by the toughness of the show. Then we have a lot of them, of course, after 40 years. But strange enough, the first time we had the North American audience, our single Take One had no lyrics, very little lyrics, and was very electronic, and we had quite a lot of black audience in America. It was at the time of the Detroit scene, just a little before, and I remember a festival where we had like a fight with the security people because they were hitting the audience and stuff like that. So I think for us, every country was very surprising because the reaction of the people is very different. It's very extreme in the States. In Canada, maybe a little less. In Holland, people are mostly like under drugs and very quiet. Germans are very serious. You won't hear them, and then you will hear them going crazy at the end of the show. It's very bizarre how the reaction is different because this music is so emotional. So the reaction is like very emotional also, and it depends on the cultures.
You mentioned Al Jourgensen. What do you remember about him? What comes to mind when I mention his name?
I think he's a very talented guy. I think he felt that he started on the wrong path because he started with that pop music, but he's very good at writing pop songs also. Mm-hmm. I remember him asking his musician to be tougher on stage because he wanted to be like a little more industrial, let's say, at the time. And then he switched totally to something very heavy. What I think about Al Jourgensen is that he made the crossover between heavy metal and industrial music. And strange enough, in North America, industrial music is very linked to guitars, whereas in Europe, industrial music is almost purely electronic. It's a strange difference, but the spirit makes sense between the two continents.
Yeah, it was funny. Ministry was interesting. Like you play old Ministry and people don't believe it's Ministry, like over the shoulder, but you still had the analog machine elements to it a little bit, right? So he was still using technology, but it was pop. Yeah. And then almost overnight he switched, so maybe that was his true passion. What's your thoughts on the current state of the electronic music scene now, industrial in particular? We don't hear like full length albums like we used to. It's mostly track by track, but what's your current thoughts on where it is right now?
I think the main difference is what I said before. It's about the concept. I think you have less of a concept. I think electronic music today is more tryouts of a lot of people, but less maybe a political will like those bands had at the time. I remember with F242 in the studio, we were almost talking more than making music. It's like you think about what you do and why you do it. And that's this engagement is something that I miss. People standing for something that would be a subculture or an anti-rock movement or something, I won't say anti-fab, but whatever. I won't go maybe that far, but at least having a sense of your impact with your music towards the people and explaining more than just recording tracks and playing live. Because we have the cover, we have the slogans, we had like the uniforms. I mean, there was something that was like very strong. It's the same for bands like Throb and Gristle.
Yeah, it was the ideology. Is
definitely.
It doesn't exist like it did then. And I remember it. I remember you also saying, this is a quote of yours: "Industrial people in general have a pessimistic vision, a critical vision of the world." Do you still agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so. It's a reaction. I mean, it's strange. I mean, each time I start to do a track, it's going to be dark. I don't know why. Why can I not be fun? It's like it's in your mind. I think it's because music is an expression, and I think the world is tough. The world's not easy. There's a lot of there are like a lot of things that helps you to have a positive vision. I mean, I love nature, for instance, and stuff like that. But once you go deep into your mind, then you start to we are condemned to die. It's like that's the main fact, and this is driving like a lot of the way that you react, the way that you compose or create. It's strange to be dark like that, but I think also you don't accept things. It's also a way to revolt and to rebel. I think we miss that. I was speaking about resistance. I think we need to have some more resistance to things, not necessarily being anarchists, but at least to question things. And the music is an expression. It's a field where you can do that.
Yeah, that's a good way of explaining it. And Obviously, we've been talking about it here, but you were pioneers in the use of technology, machine sampling. I just want to ask you what the creative process was like for Front 242. Like, how did you create the music and, the brand and the visual? Like, what was the creative process like for you?
Okay. There was no real rule, I would say that the classic way would be that Daniel, who had some notions of drumming, would start with a sort of bass line and a drum pattern. Then I would go in with trying to structure things and compose and add some sampling and other sounds. Then we would send that demo to Jean-Luc the singer. He would try to write a text, and then when we recorded in the studio, then Richard would come by and give like those side vocals to it. But that's one way. But sometimes it's just a sample. Like for Welcome to Paradise, you have like, hey, poor, you don't have to be poor, or no sex until marriage. You start from that quote and you build around it. Again, it's very mental. It's very like you compose a little bit like a movie. It's not really like a rock band or something like that. It's by drawers, I would say, like drawers in a closet, like each got its drawer and you pass a piece of music to each other. And we reach back what I said about like having a sort of collage. That's why so many tracks go different directions. Some tracks could be sang on and then you have a singer and it's more composed like a song, like Headhunter or whatever. But some other tracks don't find their way. So we keep it instrumental and as a sort of research track.
Are you a new real estate agent or thinking about getting a real estate license? If so, you're going to want to ask about the Greater Property Group's Agent Scholarship Program. Why pay for the cost of the course yourself when the Greater Property Group will subsidize the cost for you? Make sure you reach out and get all the details on the Greater Property Group's Agent Scholarship Program. Were you surprised at how popular Headhunter was? Or was it a turning point for the group? I mean, that Headhunter really it had commercial success, right? Like to this day, people still play Headhunter, Yeah. Were you surprised at the success of it, or did you just compose that one differently? Was it with the intent to be played in all the clubs and everything?
Yeah, we were very surprised about it. To tell you the truth, it wasn't supposed to be the single of that album initially, and there was another track normally. I think it is, and it's still one of the rare industrial hit track that I know, popular industrial track, one of the rare one with maybe some of Nine Inch Nails and so. But at the time, we were really not aware of the success it would be. Especially that single with "Welcome to Paradise" on the other side, it was a big hit in Spain also because in all the dance clubs, those tracks could be played in dance club as well, industrial clubs as well as in very different type of happenings. It was very surprising. Yeah.
Headhunter to me is one of those timeless industrial classics. Like I could listen to it over and over again, never get tired of it. There was something special about that track, years later. Like I said, it's on all the playlists. In doing some research, how did movies and architecture play a role in inspiring, the creative process of the branding? Well,
being non-musician, because we're not musician, like I said, being non-musician and having those machines in front of you, like synthesizer that at the time were quite complicated, you had to relate to something. You couldn't work like a rock band and saying, okay, I'm going to be the bass player, you're going to be like the guitar player, we couldn't use that recipe of rock music. We were in front of like black boxes with buttons. So architecture at the time was what's so-called postmodernist architecture, which is an architecture that uses a lot of grids. And there's a grid for the lights, there's a grid for the circulation of the people. arrange the building and the different rooms and so. And this really helped us to structure things. So if you listen to the Front 242 music, it's very much horizontal layer. It takes a little more 3D effect in the production, but we needed to make it very quite mathematic, like architecture can be. So for us, this way of structuring the songs were related to what was happening in architecture at the time or still as today. Now, the lyric part, because that's pretty much like the very, I would say, rigorous part, mathematic part, but now the lyric part came from all those sounds that you could find in films, because there's much more richness in a film than in an album from a band at the time. So there we could find those sounds. There were even no sampler at the time in the beginning, but we could relate to that because we were more interested in sound than really being interested in music. I would say that music was very often a support or something that would help person who would listen to it to catch something. But at the same time, there was a lot of research, and that was more like coming from the film soundtrack field.
Yeah, and I guess that explains like why you were also into Russian constructivism, Italian futurism, right?
Yeah.
That all played a role, influenced the music.
Yeah, definitely, because that's the move for the constructivism. I would say it's related to the sort of toughness and mathematic part of having to work with those machines who were really not easy and reliable. And then what I would say, like the Italian futurism is more like the movements and the way that you put things together. Those were two artistic movements that were very important for us.
Yeah, and your videos were also art pieces as well, which was interesting. I'm sure inspired by some of the art you guys were involved with, right? Those videos. I also remember I have like distinct memories of the Boba Fett video for Headhunter with Boba Fett.
Yeah. The thing is, like, we had a long conversation with Anton Corbin, which is actually, one of the guys who worked with U2 and Depeche Mode. And we gave him like really carte blanche, like we would say. He could really do whatever he wanted. But he right away connected us with that architecture that you could find in Brussels from the 50s that was close to something very administrative, very austere, very hostile. And it matched because what I really like about that video is that there is also a sense of humor in it, and that's something that I miss, and it's very difficult to integrate into what we do. But this was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. That's an interesting perspective. Now, here's a question. Where does industrial music and the genre go from here? It sounds very similar. Like you mentioned in North America, it's very guitar heavy, a lot of the industrial, but thoughts on maybe the technology or where the genre goes from here?
Well, industrial music to me appears by waves. It's like it disappears for a while or you don't hear it very much, and then it comes back. I think it really depends on the world situation. I think if there's like a very dark image of the world, probably that more and more bands will express it on a very strong way. And I think there's no movement anymore. There are less and less movement. The last movement that I more or less remember is something like dubstep. But we don't speak about movements, but more like about tryouts here and there. You hear an artist that sounds more like, or that pushes the music more like in one direction than another. So like I said, I think it's totally fragmented. You still find some people like the Cold Wave Festival, for instance, in Chicago, that can gather like old bands with new bands and make sense on the whole evening. I think there you have like some peaks of something that you might call industrial world. But besides that, I don't think there's a full movement of that anymore.
Got it.
But the influence remains.
Yeah, I mean, the influence will always be there. It was the beginning of something, and it's still relevant today. So what's next for the group? I know you got the tour coming up. Do you have any projects besides that, or are you just focused on the tour?
No, we have Actually, we create a whole new aesthetic for the tour. We have new clips, let's say, that are very different to what we always did. It's not like those psychedelic images anymore. We have like mostly like very cinematographic landscapes and stuff like that. It's very powerful. It's all black and white. Also, like I said at the beginning of this interview, we consider the live shows as a platform to create. So we experiment 3 new tracks also. We hope to have a 4th one by the time we go to Canada. So we bring in like new tracks live, and we try the singers are trying to find stuff on it. They have basically a band. It's a little bit of improvisation, but it's a more organic way to make things happening rather than being in studio for like 15 days and not really knowing. We have new tracks. We have like new imagery, and the band is still very physical on stage. So that hasn't changed. So I guess you guys will discover that.
Yeah, can't wait. So here's a question. Where are you finding inspiration for new projects and endeavors right now? Like, is it still the same? Is it still film and things like that, dark imagery? Where are you finding inspiration?
Well, for me, it's what really shakes me. It is mainly film, but now mostly series. Like TV series is like the when I listen to the soundtrack of Mr. Robot, or when I watch like the contents of Euphoria, for instance, I think this is going very far in sexuality, in drugs, in extremes. I'm very interested in young people. I think young people express themselves on a very wild way, but a very interesting way also. They're more rebellious than what we were almost at the time. The problem is that they look for a direction. And for me, when I watch young people, because I'm teaching also, I think there's something growing there that's super interesting. It is they don't accept the world like we try to sell it. So I'm very interested in that movement, although it's not totally a movement. Politics is still also something that interests me, in international politics. Like I said, musically, there are too many instruments on the market and a lot of plugins and stuff like that. So I'm more tempted to limit myself when I start a project with 2 or 3 instruments and start with that. Besides that, I still keep the reflexes and the way of working that I did in the 80s. Only the technology has changed, but my mind is still working. I believe very much in the senses of human being. I think you all start with your 5 senses and your IDs rather than expecting the machine to tell you something. You know what I mean? So for me to create like a sort of strong ambition, intention, philosophy, watching stuff, this is feeding me. And then only I try to express this in a sort of waveform or a musical form.
You mentioned teaching. So when you're not creating music, you're a teacher?
Yeah, I'm a teacher also. I work with documentary music. I teach for documentary music. I teach in audio video also. I teach also, I have a theory cursus about sound. So I work in 5.1 also for documentaries. So yeah, I try to keep myself busy. I'm DJing also, I mean, which is something totally different. So even though I'm like in my 60s, I sometimes happen to be at 4 o'clock in the morning in Spain DJing. You know, it's like totally crazy world.
You know what's funny though is like some of the pioneers, like yourself and Goldie. I mean, he's still DJing, 60 years old, close to 60, you know, or whatever. Like going strong, man. The music never leaves your soul, you know, and never leaves your DNA. What are you listening to now? Besides your own music you're creating, is there anybody that you're listening to now or you're impressed by music-wise now?
Well, I was impressed by, going back to series, by the guy Labyrinth, the guy who did the soundtrack for Euphoria. The production is amazing on those tracks. I listen also to what they call like minimal wave sometimes, like bands like Codenys, for instance, or adult band like that, or I still listen to all tracks also because I like krautrock, like the German krautrock, the German music from the 70s. I'm not gonna pull iTunes, but I listen really, I really listen to to a lot of different stuff. It could be like also ambient music, because when I'm the booker for the band also, so there I'm more tempted to put ambient music. One of my masters is Brian Eno, for instance.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So yeah, there's like, but here when I see it, so it goes from archive, Ashra Temple, which is German, David Bowie,
yeah.
Dead Can Dance, French music also, because I'm French speaking. Gesaffelstein is on this. You have like Julia Bondar, which is like somebody from a new person that I just discovered, telling Massive Attack. It's like Nicolas Jarre, like Pet Shop Boys, all kinds of stuff like.
Oh, that's what a playlist.
Yeah, it goes all directions, but I'm still interested in production, and when somebody's got something to say, I'm like very excited about it. Then I listen to it. I'm still very paying attention to the avant-garde and stuff like that.
Yeah, fantastic. I always like to ask that question of creatives. 2 questions left. What do you do for fun? What do you do in your downtime?
I have a lot of walks with my dog, so that's something I do for fun. I enjoy seeing small concerts in like crap places. Yeah. I enjoy that very much, like something that brings back things into your guts. It's like, so I enjoy going and watch concerts. Yeah, that's basically it. Traveling, I'm a diver also. I like to dive. So I travel for diving when I can. That's what I do mostly for fun. That's great. And final question. This one will really make you think, Patrick. If you could have dinner with any 3 people in history, past or present, who would they be and why? Well, it would be definitely Brian Eno, because I think it's one of the first guy who had like some theories about popular music, and who decided to go another way. Very impressed by his album "My Life in My Life in the Bushes of Ghosts" with David Byrne. That album. That's one guy. The other guy. Okay, I have to find 2 other men to have a dinner with.
It's tough.
Well, I would like to have a dinner with Julian Assange, because I think this guy would be. It's his life so. Because he was just in search for truth, and that's a guy. I don't know if I have to admire him totally or not, because he put some people in danger, but at least he got the guts to do something that is like exceptional to me. And the third person, it would be Donald Trump, I think, because this guy's so. I would have such a great time just to read this quote. I'm just like going nuts when I listen to this guy. It would be like totally out of the blue, So
wow, what a dinner table that would be, hey? So Brian Eno, Julian Assange, and Donald Trump. What a dinner table. Anyways, Patrick, my man, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to get today. Glad we actually made this happen. Thank you very much, Patrick. We'll see you in Montreal.
I'm glad you enjoyed. Yeah,
we'll see you in Montreal. All right, brother.
Bye, David. Bye.
Bye.